Hello, guys. Welcome to this new edition of Mind Podcast. This is Aadit Kapadia coming to you on yet another phenomenal, action-packed week. Matlab, for people like us who are, political buffs, read about history as well, sports, culture. Which week is really not action-packed? But this week especially, a lot of things were going on and stuff. But we are here today on Mind Podcast not to completely just do a news wrap of the week. We will talk about the news of the week as well, but we are also here to talk about topics that are not discussed in mainstream media, topics that even podcasters don't completely delve into, and a scope and a variety of discussions of not just personalities but of issues and current affairs within the space which we are going to talk about. The reason I'm not completely laying out the topic is because there is no one topic. This is going to be a discussion over a multitude of topic, from politics to culture to ecosystems and so forth. And I have a fabulous guest with me today. I have with me Guru Prakash Paswan, who is a national spokesperson of the BJP. He's an assistant professor at the Patna University. He's an author, he's a columnist and an academic, and has recently completed his PhD from DU, one of the first people from within his community, the Paswan community, to finish the PhD. And congratulations, many congratulations to you. And as is someone whose viewpoints, whose I always look out for. I always, want have an engaged myself with what he has to say, and get more knowledge out of it. So he's here with us on Mind Podcast, and I couldn't be happier for a fascinating discussion. Welcome to Mind Podcast, Guru.
Thank you so much, Adit Bhai. It's a matter of honor and privilege to be
Oh,
at the Mind Makers podcast. Obviously,
lovely.
we got an opportunity to chit chat physically when I was in
Yes,
Houston, and
absolutely.
I have read about it. And Mind Makers as a platform, I think, have been speaking on real issues. Have been speaking from a standpoint of an objective, detached, dispassionate on different issues, because these days we know that organizations, especially media organizations, they have their own agenda, they have their own issues. But as someone who has been following your work, Mind Makers has been doing a phenomenal job, especially among the diaspora and covering issues domestically as well. So I'm looking forward to this conversation with you, Adit.
Absolutely, absolutely. Pleasure. The pleasure is ours, and thank you for coming here. To kick things off, right? You mentioned. I mean, it was great meeting you here in Houston. I seldom get to say that because Houston pe mulakatein hoti hai, but not all the time. So, but this happened very recently, and we were talking about one thing amongst other things. We were talking about your fantastic book that you've written, and I don't want to go straight into the book. I want to kind of build up to the book as coming back. I mean, just taking a step back, you've been an academic, you've been a student, then you've been a columnist and author, and the political journey has simultaneously gone with it, right? So when I talk about you reading this book, or coming approaching it with a very historical perspective, what shaped that journey, and where did you start from, and how did you get here? So very small question, as you can say.
Yes, definitely. I mean, but
No, I'm kidding, of
as,
course. Yeah.
as spokesperson, we are designed to respond to such questions as well. So, yeah,
Yes.
part of our job. But interestingly, you see, this project, the book which I have co-authored with a very dear friend of mine, Sudarshan Ramabhadran. So we started in 2015. It was birth anniversary of Baba Sahib Ambedkar, and we sort of thought collectively that we should write something that has not been explored yet, the unexplored dimensions of the personality of Baba Sahib Ambedkar. Because you see, unfortunately, our generation, when we read Baba Sahib Ambedkar, what we have been told that he was exclusively the leader of the subaltern classes, leader of the depressed classes. He was someone who gave voice to the voiceless, rightly so, appropriately. But as an academic, as someone who is genuinely curious about knowing more about his personality, we are not told his role as a phenomenal economist. So I was when I was touring the US, I went to University of Columbia, And I consciously made this effort to reach out to Herbert Lehman Library. So Herbert Lehman Library is one of the very important libraries in the University of Columbia. And in the entire history of the library, there is not a single bust of any other individual but for Baba Sahib Ambedkar.
Wow.
It is a matter of great honor and privilege for people like us. Here you have someone.
Absolutely. Hmm.
Exactly. Baba Sahib Ambedkar, who makes this journey. And if you
Hmm.
look at it like this, you would also realize that during that time, many
Hmm.
of his generation, they were going to UK for education in law, for training in bar, so that they can come back and probably make a more lucrative career out of it. But Ambedkar as a person, Ambedkar as a scholar, he chooses to go to University of Columbia because he had an interest in philosophy, in sociology, and something which sort of compels you to think and develop perspective on different issues. So Ambedkar, for that matter, goes to University of Columbia, and his issues, his interaction with Professor John Dewey, for that matter. So the point which I'm trying to make is when we wrote that article on the
Hmm.
unexplored dimensions of Ambedkar, Ambedkar beyond depressed classes, Ambedkar beyond constitution, the
Right.
role of Ambedkar and his different facets of personality, the organic feedback which we received was
Hmm.
excellent. It was wonderful. People were like, so we thought that there is a group of people out there
Hmm.
who want
Hmm.
to read on these issues, who want to read about Baba Sahib Ambedkar, who want to read about Dalit history from a different angle, from a different
Yes.
perspective. Because unfortunately, what is happening is that you see Dalit literature or Dalit
Hmm.
history that has
Hmm.
been viewed and written from the angle of two extremes.
Yeah.
One is the definitely the history of atrocity, the history
Hmm.
of violence, the history of exploitation, to which I am not denying. There has
Hmm.
certainly been instances and historical account of
Absolutely.
discrimination as well. But at the same time, the case which we are trying to build is that we have
Hmm.
to identify icons. And other, we must understand that icons create inspiration.
Hmm. Hmm.
Icons create inspiration within the communities that have been at the margins. So one of the fundamental ideas behind the book was this: to identify icons and create a different version, a positive version of Dalit history.
And what struck me here is icons were also creating a timeline of the growth and the strength to strength. I mean, dekho, I think there's no disagreement here that we still have a long ways to go. There are issues of discrimination within happening in certain pockets that need to be addressed and so forth. But on the larger part, from what the book talks about, right? I mean, I'm just going to take, I mean, we can start with, you talk about Baba Sahib Ambedkar, but then you get into a political sort of where you talk about Kanshi Ram, Babu Jagjeevan Ram, and so forth. Till you are going to K.R. Narayan, who became the first Dalit president of India. So it's a fascinating journey, and one doesn't think that that is the be all end all. As अभी तो बहुत बहुत कुछ लिखना है और आगे जाना है, but someone has to start. And I think what struck me about the book, and I've been reading, I actually, I reread parts of the book that I had marked on, the wonderful part. And please guys, Amazon does not pay me. I just prefer reading it on a Kindle so that I can travel and just have one Kindle. But it lets me highlight. So that's why I was showing the ebook, because personally I prefer that. I mean, I love physical books, but you can get it, your ebook copy of the ebook. But coming back to this, um in your mind, right, were you also conscious about talking about historic figures like Rani Jalkari Bai, or when you talk about Valmiki Vedvyas, or Jogendranath Mandal as well? And most, I would say, about 90% of your book is about historic figures that existed in the last 200 odd years. So how does one make that transition? There are about 25% of the leaders that people like you and me, or people who are even younger than us, have read about them, have grown up reading them even in school textbooks. And there are some, like, I don't think someone like me who's born and raised in Gujarat knew as much as he should have about Guru Ravidas. I frankly knew more about it. after I was done. And the reason I give the Gujarat's example is ki the icons we would know about are, so Bhimrao Ambedkar we do read quite a bit about, because of his connection to the Baroda empire and Maharashtra and all that. So how does one deal with that, right? How does one approach that?
Oh, that's interesting. So when we were sort of in this process of identifying the icons, we sort of had an unsaid rule that we have to take in mind the gender diversity, that both male and female icons are represented equally. We also made an effort to see that we have regional diversity as well. So when you say there is a Sant Ravidas, there is a Sant Kabir, we also have someone like Tiruvallur from Tamil Nadu. We also have someone like Guru Jishwa from Andhra Pradesh. We also have someone like Ayankalli and Narayan Guru from Kerala who are not talked about. And interestingly, when I was doing this conversation, people were really positively surprised to see that there are icons and important icons from the south of India as well. And that's something which is very important, because if you look at us culturally, you look at us civilizationally, for us, the definition of nation is not just geography. For us, the definition of nation is civilizational, it is cultural. When you have someone like and I frequently like to go back to this because late Sushma Swaraj once made a very interesting comment on the floor of the parliament.
Mm.
She, when she was explaining the concept of Rashtra, she
Mm.
said, and I still remember, and it honestly gives me goosebumps. So back then, there was the speaker of Lok Sabha was Somnath Chatterjee, and
Mm.
Sushma ji was so vociferous in saying that
Mm.
our cultural and civilizational imagination of nation is that a Somnath Chatterjee who is born in East India,
Yeah.
their parents और उनके जो माता पिता हैं वो अपने बच्चे का नाम सोमनाथ करते हैं, जो कि पश्चिमी भारत में एक ज्योतिर्लिंग के नाम पे रखा जाता है। तो पूर्वी भारत में एक बालक का जन्म होता है और उस बालक का नाम सोमनाथ रखा जाता है, जो कि पश्चिमी भारत गुजरात में तट पे एक ज्योतिर्लिंग है। ऐसे बहुत सारे उदाहरण हैं, ऐसे बहुत सारे एग्जाम्पल हैं। So this was one of our underlying sort of incentive, that we
Mm.
have to identify gender diversity, we have to identify icons from across the different parts of the country. So that was one important inspiration behind it. But interestingly, the fact that you pointed out about the political figures which we have.
Mm.
So while speaking about political figures, and again, when I was in the US, so I mean, that's a different ballgame altogether. But if you look
Mm.
at the Dalit leadership post independence, you look
Mm.
at
Mm.
Ambedkar, you look at Babu Jagjivan Ram, we have written about Babu Jagjivan Ram, Kanshi
Mm.
Ram, Mayawati, Ramvilas Paswan,
Mm.
all of them have been devout Hindus. Babu Jagjivan Ram, interestingly, the
Mm.
only Dalit deputy prime minister. If you go to his memorial in New Delhi, you would still see a Tulsi ka podha.
Mm.
Kanshiramji never converted, Mayawati never converted, Ramvilas Paswan never converted. So we have to realize, even when Baba Sahib Ambedkar converted to Buddhism,
Mm.
Buddhism is Indic faith.
Mm.
So Baba Sahib Ambedkar also has this realization. So when I was in the US, people were
Mm.
saying, "Oh, Hindutva culture is exclusivist, Hindutva culture is supremacist." I gave them a simple example that you look at the leadership of my community. My leadership have been devout Hindus. The
Mm.
present leadership have been devout Hindus. The past leadership have been devout Hindus. So this entire question, and another very important example which I gave, and I have also like plugged in, that you look at the three foundational texts of our culture and civilization, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, and the Constitution of India, they were all authored by Dalits. So the point is not this. The point is that there is a specific, and which we often term the breaking India forces, which the Honorable Prime Minister also mentioned
Mm.
as one of his speeches recently, कि बहुत सारी ऐसी शक्तियां हैं, ऐसी बहुत
Mm.
सारी शक्तियां हैं जो कि कास्ट और जेंडर को अपना
Mm.
हथियार बनाना चाहती हैं, और
Mm.
कास्ट और जेंडर के नाम पे हमारे कल्चर, हमारे सिविलाइजेशन पे आक्रमण करते हैं. So there is time, and when
Mm.
you ask this question, तो बुक लिखने के पीछे हमारी ये भी मंशा थी कि जाति और जो जेंडर का विमर्श है उसमें एक सकारात्मक हस्तक्षेप होने की भी आवश्यकता है.
Mm. Mm. And absolutely, on I think you hit a couple of very fantastic points. Ki Hindutva, or whatever you talked about in terms of religion, right? It you said in the book also, you talk about it's not reduced to a political message. It's reduced to a belief. It's a belief system of what someone believed in. Right now, you one can argue in 1955 or 1950 or 1980 or 2010, the awareness, the issues that, discussions that need to be had, probably we were having them more in 1980 than we were in 1950. Or and that too have context, and that too has consequences. So that is why, you have the evolution of Dalit politics, as you talked about. um, Now, but I want to talk a little bit about, and I'll come back to your book in a second. But I want to talk about something. It's a video you posted today. You talked, I think you posted on your Twitter and your Instagram, about Dalit literature and ecosystem, right? So where you were doing the talk at JLF with my friend Sunanda, it's a fantastic talk, guys. I would recommend anyone who hasn't, please do check it out. You talked about the leftist ecosystem, which claims that they stand for the equality, so to speak, but they don't have that inclusion in their own politburo, where, I mean, I don't know, it happened, what, 5 years ago? I don't even know when it happened, when a Dalit leader was included. And so are we to believe that the Communist Party of India, Marxist or others, did not find the Dalit leaders amongst within ranks, or that Dalits never wanted to be communists? I don't mean this facetiously, but I quite, because they claim that if they are, then is the Politburo representative of India? It really isn't, because they claim, if they are talking about adequate representation, why don't they have it there?
Very interesting, very interesting. So, you know, when I spoke about this issue, obviously in Houston at the JLF session, and
Yeah.
this was received very well, because unfortunately, you see the amount of literature, the amount of scholarship which has been generated by the left, and
Hmm.
I am of this firm opinion that there was an understanding between the Congress government and the leftist establishment post
Hmm. Hmm.
independence. कांग्रेस ने कहा कि भाई राजपाट हम संभालेंगे और जितना इंटेलेक्चुअल और एकेडमिक काम है वो आप लोग देखो. ये भी एक
Hmm.
गठबंधन था, ये भी एक अलायंस और अंडरस्टैंडिंग कांग्रेस और कम्युनिस्टों की तब से थी, जिसका हम लोग आज नतीजा देखते हैं. तो अगर
Hmm.
ये डिनायलिज्म नहीं है, अगर
Hmm.
लोग डिनाई करें, आज अगर कांग्रेस के लोग और वामपंथी शक्तियां डिनाई करें, तो मैं इसको स्वीकार नहीं करूंगा. और यही
Hmm.
कारण था जब 2004 में यूपीए 1 की सरकार आती है. यूपीए
Hmm.
1 की सरकार आती है और नेशनल एडवाइजरी काउंसिल बनता है, तो उसमें कांग्रेस और कम्युनिस्टों का जो गठबंधन था वो हम लोगों ने साफ देखा. बट
Hmm.
प्रश्न ये नहीं है. वी हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड दैट the left, and
Hmm.
specifically if you look at the People's Voice, which was the
Hmm.
Communist Party of India's mouthpiece, if you
Hmm.
look at it from 1942 to 1960, the
Hmm.
18 years, 20 years of the People's Voice, the leftist mouthpiece, they were very critical of Baba Saheb Ambedkar. They were very critical of his work. Ambedkar was someone who has criticized communism. Ambedkar was someone who was a supporter of free market. But the point is not this. The position of left on social issues, the position of left on Ambedkar, the position of left on Dalit leadership, on Dalit issues has been evolving. But the problem is this, that when they claim to be the sole custodian of the marginalized,
Right.
problem तब वो
Hmm.
कहते हैं कि हाशिए की आवाज हम हैं. वी आर द वन हु विल गिव वॉइस टू द वॉइसलेस. ये अधिकार आपको किसने दिया है?
Hmm.
ये अधिकार आपको किसने दिया है कि आप वॉइसलेस. अब जो पुस्तकें बीच में आई थी, एक ऐसा
Hmm.
दौर था, कैन द सबॉल्टन स्पीक, कैन द सबॉल्टन स्पीक, ये अलग चल रहा है भाई. अरे भाई, अगर
Hmm.
सबॉल्टन को बोलना है तो सबॉल्टन तय करेगा ना. आप कौन होते हो उसके
Correct.
दिमाग में तय करने वाले?
Hmm.
तो आई हैड अ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग एक्सपीरियंस दिस टाइम. आई एम
Hmm.
not sure if you have read about it. So, Delhi University College, Lady
Hmm.
Shriram College,
Hmm.
invited me to speak on Ambedkar Jayanti this year.
Hmm.
उन्होंने बोला कि भाई आप आइए and let's have a discussion on the theme of Ambedkar beyond Constitution, a topic
Hmm.
very dear to my heart, because I am of the firm opinion that Ambedkar was an intellectual colossus. By restricting him exclusively as the leader of the depressed classes is doing a great disservice to his legacy. तो एलएसआर ने
Absolutely.
मुझे बोला कि आप आइए और बात करिए अंबेडकर बियॉन्ड कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन पे. You will be
Hmm.
surprised to know that the SFI and the AISF, the student wing and the youth wing of the Communist Party in the Lady Shriram College, they cancelled my event.
Unbelievable.
They cancelled my event and they said, so this is the hypocrisy. ये उनके जो दोहरे मापदंड है, अब
Ah.
सबॉर्डिनेट सबॉर्डिनेट बोल सकता है क्या? अब ये कौन सबॉर्डिनेट बोलेगा, ये वो तय करेंगे क्या? अब भाई दलितों में भी कौन दलित बोलेगा जो दलित मेरे टेस्ट का है, जो दलित
Hmm.
मेरी बात करेगा, वो बोलेगा अरे भाई आपके टेस्ट का दलित तो आपको ढूंढने में 100 साल लग गया।
Hmm.
1915 में 1915 में एम एन रॉय ने ये शुरू किया था कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी भारत में, और
Hmm.
आज till date in 100 years they were not able to find a dalit person in their highest decision making body which was the politburo। अभी आए हैं एक साल पहले वेस्ट बंगाल से राजकुमार जी। अरे
Hmm.
किस प्रकार की बात करते हैं तुम? Our problem is that you are not the sole custodian of the voice of the marginalized and the fringe element। आपको कौन बोलता है?
Absolutely.
आपको ये अधिकार किसने दिया है? तो ये हमें समझने की आवश्यकता है। तो ये जब बात करते हैं कि भाई ब्राह्मणवाद से आजादी, अरे भाई
Hmm.
आप को तो आजाद करो इस चीज से, प्रॉब्लम है
No, no, you're right.
उनका उनकी परिभाषा क्या है ब्राह्मणवाद की, उनकी परिभाषा क्या है मनुवाद की? शुद्ध रूप से, शुद्ध रूप से उनका एक ही एजेंडा है, वो है डिसइंटीग्रेशन। वो बिहाफिज्म जो मैं बोलता हूँ, it is a
Hmm.
sense of behalfism that they are not competent enough to speak on their behalf, so I am competent enough and I will speak on their behalf. That is where I have a problem with.
Absolutely, and you're right. I mean, not just with the Dalit representation. I think if they claim to stand about equality when it comes to gender, the women of India were not represented in the Politburo itself. And this is not to suggest even talk about. This is 5 minutes more that we spent on CPIM than they probably corresponding to their political relevance today, because essentially it is a dying force, right? Except in a newsroom studios. I actually wrote a tweet today where Rahul Gandhi, when he went and during his whole yatra thing, when he went and met to these quote unquote intellectuals like Aruna Roys and Yogendra Yadavs of this world, I'm like, might have won 5 more good op-eds in TV studios and news medias and stuff, or good blogs. He's probably lost 5 elections consecutively in India now if he keeps listening to these people, right? But you know,
No, if I
those
can add to
yeah.
it, if I can add to
Please,
it,
please, please,
so
please. Yeah.
there is a very good book, and I would definitely recommend for your viewers that the book is called The Blood Island. Blood
Hmm.
Island was written by Deep Haldar, who is a very senior
Yeah.
journalist at India Today. And this book talks about how the left government in West Bengal, they institutionally killed thousands of Dalits in Morijjopi in Sundarban.
Hmm.
And I would definitely recommend that you invite, probably I will connect you to Deep Haldar, who has written
I
this
would.
very beautiful account that
Yeah.
how left or the left political institution who claim to be the representative of Dalits, they systematically, institutionally killed thousands of Dalits.
I'm just the reason I was not distracted, guys. I was trying to find a link for our viewers to look Blood Island, at the an oral history of the. So yeah, so no, I think it's a fascinating book that Deep has written, and you're right. I mean, we've actually featured a review of that book, but I would definitely love to do a podcast with him on this as well, because again, these are stories that. I think the medium that we have gives us this option and opportunity to talk about these stories, because the problem with the news cycle is ki aaj to acha, this is not an issue today, why should we talk about it, right? This falana dhimka actor is doing this, let's talk about this. We are not bound by such practices. So I always believe the best conversation is the one that leads to another conversation. So I'm
Correct.
glad that we are having this discussion on this. But I want to now almost may take a turn back to the book and what you talked about is, so let's, from the political part, let's talk about a little bit about the historic part. And I found this very interesting that you amongst the historic figures you had, Ayanakali, as you said, you had Kabir Das, Rani Jhalkari Bai, who was with Rani Lakshmi Bai in the 1857 war for independence, Savitri Bai Phule, Sohra Bai. So these are figures that जहन में है. people have, they are on your lips, but a lot of people are not familiar with the exact story. And the sad part of the world we live in is that now people are wait for streaming shows and movies to find more about that, right? So I'm glad you are writing a book where you're chronicling the, the makers of modern Dalit history and talking about these women. So if we can just talk a couple of minutes about it, and what you found out when you were researching about them.
But even today,
Hmm.
if you go to parts of Madhya Pradesh, you go to
Hmm.
Jabalpur, Rani
Hmm.
Jhalkari Bai is still living there. When I
Hmm.
say she's still living there, she's still living and she's still resonating in the memories of the people over there.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
On her Jayanti, on her Punyatithi, unke birth anniversary or death anniversary, pe, there is huge celebration.
Hmm.
So I would not necessarily agree that there are. I mean, obviously, we need to document and we need to bring them into the mainstream academic account, but locally and culturally, they are still alive in the memories of our people.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
importantly, in the course of our research, we found that and history writing, you
Hmm.
see, because it was one of our very great challenges, if I can say that,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
history that has been written post independence, obviously one family, one person, one surname, as if they were the person only responsible for the entire freedom struggle. If you try to do an objective and dispassionate study of freedom movement in India, you would be surprised to know.
I
Savarkar
agree.
had before Vikram's book came, before Vikram
Hmm.
Sampat's book Savarkar came, there was a
Hmm.
lot of distortion, there was a lot of misinterpretation, there was a lot of problematic accounts. If you look
Hmm.
at our academics, if you look at the history, but only after Vikram Sampat's phenomenal work on Veer Savarkar, we saw that Savarkar is now being looked at academically. So, if you need more such studies, you need more such accounts, you need more such scholarship. And
And there was so much demonization about Savarkar without people having read even 15 words of what he wrote.
exactly, exactly. And that is where I see the problem. Savarkar was a deep social reformer. Savarkar spoke about caste. Savarkar was vocal on issues of caste. Savarkar was vocal on social reforms. He said that the caste system must go lock, stock, and barrel. But we are
Yeah,
not aware of it.
yeah. I mean, he essentially was an advocate for the annihilation of caste,
Exactly.
if I may want to use that term,
Correct,
because
correct, correct, correct.
and I not, I mean, not just Vikram. I think not just Vikram's work, which is phenomenal. I think everyone should read that. But I would say even speeches of his that he may have been transcribed and stuff. Read them in as what they said, and try to think of the context. The reason why I think read Vikram's book is you have to think of context, because अगर 1954 में कुछ बोला गया है which is resonating with you in 2022, think of how bold a statement it was in 1954 or
Correct.
64 or whenever it was said. And that's what I want people to think about as well on this.
Correct. Rightly you said so. And in fact, Savarkar advocated for temple entry.
Hmm.
सावरकर did a टेम्पल सत्याग्रह. तो
Hmm.
सावरकर जैसा व्यक्ति जिनको आप आज एक लेंस में जानबूझ करके पोर्ट्रे करते हैं, सावरकर एज अ सोशल रिफॉर्मर, एक
Hmm.
सामाजिक क्रांति के अग्रदूत के रूप में, सामाजिक क्रांति के जनक के रूप में आप उनके पक्ष को नहीं बताते, तो ये भी आप
Hmm.
इतिहास के साथ अन्याय करते हैं, वर्तमान पीढ़ी और भविष्य पीढ़ी के साथ अन्याय करते हैं आप. So in
Hmm.
the course of our research, Adit, we also found
Hmm.
that not much of resources was available on someone like Rani Jhalkari Bai. And रानी झलकारी बाई, लाइक आई सेड, वो अभी भी मध्य प्रदेश में जबलपुर में जाइए, ग्वालियर में जाइए, आज भी
Hmm.
उनकी मूर्तियां हैं, आज
Hmm.
भी पीपल वर्शिप हर. बट
Hmm.
अनफॉर्चुनेटली 100-200 kilometers away from Madhya Pradesh, you do not see any semblance of Rani Jhalkari Bai in
Yeah.
our history books. कहीं मिलती ही नहीं है रानी झलकारी बाई.
Yeah.
तो ये एक कठिनाई का तो सामना करना पड़ा था कि भाई अगर इन लोगों के बारे में रिसर्च करना है, इनके लीनियज को इनके लीनियज को आइडेंटिफाई करना है कि भाई रानी झलकारी बाई के परिवार का कोई व्यक्ति आज भी है क्या.
Hmm.
एक ये भी
Hmm.
बहुत बड़ा काम है, क्योंकि कहीं ना कहीं
Absolutely.
उनकी मेमोरीज में ऐसा होगा. तो ऑब्वियसली
Hmm.
रानी झलकारी बाई, अयंकली, नारायण गुरु, फॉर दैट मैटर थिरुवल्लूर, इन लोगों के बारे में रिसर्च करना एक चैलेंज था. बट इस चैलेंज के साथ साथ लोकली वी वर एबल टू locate and identify some really good resources. And it was a learning and education for both of us as
No, no, absolutely. And we are all students of history. We are all lovers of history, right? Before we talk about even students, and by students, I don't just mean people who study history. Aap padho, take an interest of it. It makes you a student of history. So the process itself is the reward here. The outcome is a reward for us that we get to read this, these accounts and stuff. But what you said is very very interesting, and it's not just limited to Dalit icons. If I may use that analogy to stretch it further, I think it applies also for many regional leaders. Like, I'll give an example. I'm born and raised in Ahmedabad. We all know in Ahmedabad about Dr. Jivraj Mehta, who was one of the leaders and became a CM of Gujarat. His wife Hansa Mehta, who has phenomenal contributions to India, not just as a politician, but within the committee that wrote the constitution along with B.R. Ambedkar. That's why I brought her name. I can tell you so many people from Ahmedabad would not know about Srimati Hansa Mehta, and there are so many icons like that. And I mean, and not just that. I mean, Kanayalal Munshi, who was the co-drafter, and him and B.R. Ambedkar is the most fascinating relation. People talk about Nehru and Patel, but Munshi ji and Ambedkar debated,
well.
clashed, agreed on so many occasions, and stood for each other, and came out with a constitution, came out with a product that still stands the test of time. So it's fascinating what we did 60 years ago, 70 years ago, and it's not talked about today, not talked about much today, right? So again, I took a little bit of a digression here, but what is the podcast format if we can't take a few digressions here? So coming to the closing part, the last 15 minutes of the podcast, what I want to talk about is the way forward, right? So what I mean, and when you can take up any of the points that I mentioned 5 minutes ago as well about what do you think is the way forward, right? Do we need more such books to come out? Do we need more of this incorporated in our textbooks? And then one of the facts that you talk about, which you talk about, Kenneth J. Cooper from Washington Post in 1996, who said that there are no Dalit journalists in newsrooms at that time, which Mr. Unial from Pioneer then wrote a follow-up piece. But to think about it, that we were talking about representation, and it almost 50 years after independence, someone from the West actually wrote about it. That's the sad part about it, right? So how do you address all this?
No, that's interesting. And while, like you said, you gave an interesting idea on the interface between KM Munshi and Ambedkar. I mean, I'd never thought about it. And
Yeah.
how do we encourage more such conversations, more such discussion, and more such discourses? That's very critical. And obviously, like I said, here in India, uh, there is usually a practice that, and you can have a critical way to look at it as well, that obviously on the birth anniversaries and the death anniversaries, icons are still remembered, obits are being written, essays are being published, there are small events here and there. There are both positives and not so positives way to look at it as well, that you cannot restrict these icons only on 2 days of the year, only on their birth anniversary, on their death anniversaries. They must be studied. Their contribution must be a part of our syllabus. And gradually, with the national education policy, this is happening. And one very important fillip, which I would say has been brought about with the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. With the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, the government of India is consciously promoting and cultivating scholarship of icons and the very important and relevant stakeholders in the freedom struggle. In the narrative of freedom struggle, it's very important you have someone like, so yeah, we are planning on having a second edition of this book where we will
Hmm.
have 20 more icons from the Dalit community who have made definite impact on our culture and our civilization.
Hmm.
So Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav is one such effort where now academic conversation, academic discussions have begun, that how do
Hmm.
we sort of have more rich scholarship when it comes to Dalit history, the Dalit imagination. And
Hmm.
obviously the second point which you make about the inclusion and the representation, that is something
Hmm.
which is a part of our a central part of our discussion here. So
Absolutely.
today, if you have, for the first time in our history, we have a woman from the Adivasi Samaj at the highest constitutional office. एक आदिवासी महिला का संविधान के सर्वोच्च स्थान पे जाना, अगर ये इंक्लूसिविटी और डाइवर्सिटी और रिप्रेजेंटेशन नहीं तो और क्या है?
Okay, absolutely.
You have,
And
and more interestingly, Adit, you would be obviously you are aware that the woman from the Adivasi Samaj has replaced a man from the Dalit Samaj at the highest constitutional office in the country. देश के सर्वोच्च संवैधानिक संस्थान में राष्ट्रपति भवन में एक दलित व्यक्ति का स्थान कोई लेता है तो आदिवासी समाज की महिला लेती है और ये
yeah,
देश के इतिहास में आज तक नहीं हुआ. And it
absolutely.
pains me. It pains me, Adit, because yesterday someone from the US sent me a cutting from New York Times saying
Hmm.
that Dalits are facing discrimination. Fine. I'm not living in denialism. But you
Hmm.
must also speak about that Dalits are now occupying central positions of decision making. This is
Hmm.
not being talked about. And this is what irks me genuinely. Yesterday, someone sent me on the occasion of Gandhi Jayanti, there was an advertisement in New York Times, and that is so problematic. That is how disconnected the entire Western media is.
No, and there is also a bit of racism here where they think that, oh, let us teach you how representation is done. We will tell you how you should do representation, ignoring the progress that is already made. Right? This is a let us teach you. You know, the West teaching the East, or the quote unquote. I hate the term, but they use it. The quote unquote first world talking to the quote unquote third world. Right? Um, and what we said, like representation in the newsrooms is so less. So even within even now within the representations that we have in the newsroom, they're like the ideological confirmation is seen before anything, right? Because if you talk about politics, if you talk, and I'm sure you have faced that. I mean, I don't know, kudos to you, because if you dare to swim against the leftist tide in academia and talk about that, the challenges is a complete different thing. Ki already you are facing, sort of challenges in the first place, and then you have, Array, how dare you have an independent viewpoint? You have to confirm yourself to the one true opinion that has been handed out to us in dossiers.
Correct, correct, indeed. I mean, that is a different level of
Yeah,
feudalism by the left. This is the left feudalism, I would say. That no,
yeah,
no,
yeah,
who are you to speak on their behalf? I am there, मैं ही हूँ, मैं ही बात करूंगा. अरे भाई ये
yeah.
लेफ्ट पार्टी मतलब मुझे तो बोलने में वो लगता है. These
Hmm,
same political parties of the left, they have an alliance with someone like राष्ट्रीय जनता दल. राष्ट्रीय जनता
hmm,
दल is nothing but a family enterprise. अरे आप लोकतंत्र की बात करते हो, आप लोकतंत्र को बचाने की बात करते हो, और जो पार्टियां परिवारवाद पे पोषित होती हैं उनके सहायता से आप राज्यसभा जाते हो. सीताराम येचुरी, a doyen
hmm.
of left party in India, he was sent to Rajya Sabha with the help of Rashtriya Janata Dal. So they are willing to compromise. अपनी जहां बात होगी, जहां सत्ता की प्राप्ति होगी, जहां सत्ता को साधना होगा, वहां वो लोग समझौता करने को तैयार है. ये लेफ्ट की बाहर आनी आवश्यक है आज की तारीख में. और ऐसा
No, no, and
कांचीराम जी ने
हाँ.
कहा था, बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग बात उन्होंने कही थी कि जो लेफ्ट है, जो वामपंथी है, ये हरे गाछ में छिपा हुआ हरा सांप है. ये दिखता नहीं है, अचानक से अटैक करेगा. ऐसा
हाँ,
मान्यवर कांशीराम जी ने कहा था, जिन्होंने बहुजन मूवमेंट की शुरुआत की भारत में. तो
absolutely.
दलितों के संदर्भ में वामपंथियों ने जितना बड़ा अन्याय और अत्याचार किया है, ये लोगों को बताना बहुत आवश्यक है.
No, no, you absolutely. और बिहार की बात की, इट्स अ वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग थिंग, बिकॉज आरजेडी एंड लेफ्ट के कार्डर्स के बीच में जो वायलेंस होती थी 90s में, आई डोंट नीड टू टेल यू, यू हैव सीन इट फर्स्ट हैंड. यू आर फ्रॉम बिहार. बट ये वो इलेक्टोरल स्टूडेंट का कीड़ा है ना, कि यू हैव, व्हेन यू टॉक अबाउट पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज, वो अंदर बाहर आ ही जाते. सो आई दैट हिपोक्रेसी इवन irks me more, because if you had asked me, as someone who studied elections in India, that the two parties that would never ally were Rashtriya Janata Dal and the left parties, because of actual violence. I mean, guys, मतलब ये वीडियो को यहाँ pause करें, just Google RJD left murders and violence, and we don't even need to tell you. You will see about 1,000 pieces written on it. So from the Jungle Raj to the non Jungle Raj to God knows what days, you'll see them. But going back, so actually, it was a very interesting thing you brought up, Mr. Kanchiram, and this is a good time. We'll go into our last segment and wrap up the show in the next 5-10 minutes, because Mr. Kanchiram actually, BSP gained in UP, after them Mayawati, but he's originally from Punjab, and that's where the original gud of BSP was, right? And Punjab mein, I've done various podcasts on it. The Dalit, I think the percentage wise, it's probably the highest in India in terms of percentage of Dalit population. And very rarely do people talk about the discrimination in Punjab that happens, or especially within the diaspora also, who talk about Punjab politics, that is completely ignored because it doesn't suit the narrative, right? They'll talk about the in Bihar or UP. So and I'm glad you talked about Mr. Kanshiram in the book as well. But how do you deal with that dichotomy when you
Wait,
when you talk?
that's very interesting. That's very interesting. You see, in Punjab, and obviously, see the first step. The
Hmm,
first step towards addressing Dalit issues is acknowledgement, is
hmm,
acknowledging that there is a problem. अब पंजाब में
hmm,
प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, कौन कहता है?
hmm,
पंजाब में
hmm,
अभी भी अलग गुरुद्वारे हैं, अलग क्रिमेटोरियम हैं, उसको स्वीकार करना होगा और इस समस्या को आइडेंटिफाई करके समस्या के समाधान के प्रति कुछ काम करना होगा. You
hmm,
are in Houston, you go to New York. Only this morning, a friend told me कि जैक्सन हाइट में एक रविदासी गुरुद्वारा है. जैक्सन हाइट में एक रविदासी गुरुद्वारा है, लंदन में रविदासी गुरुद्वारा है, न्यू जर्सी में रविदासी गुरुद्वारा है. दिस इज द डायस्पोरा.
hmm,
So the issue is this कि within Sikhs, within Punjab और पंजाब में भी जो ये structural issues हैं, ये
hmm.
not only in India, even outside in diaspora, there is this problem. और
Yeah,
the problem is this कि when someone like a Congress party, they said कि
yeah.
हमने दलित चीफ मिनिस्टर बनाया. अरे भाई, चरणजीत सिंह चन्नी जो अब कनाडा चले गए हैं, आपने कहा कि अब दलित चीफ मिनिस्टर बन जाएंगे. कितने समय के लिए आपने बनाया? आपका निर्णय अच्छा था, लेकिन सिर्फ 3 महीने के लिए, 4 महीने के लिए दलित चीफ मिनिस्टर बनाना. एंड आदित्य, आई मस्ट टेल यू दिस कि ये कांग्रेस का सिस्टम रहा है. जब भी कांग्रेस को लगता है कि प्लेस होल्डर सीएम बनाना है, किसी ऐसे व्यक्ति को बिठाना है कि वो कुर्सी गर्म करके रखेगा, तो किसी दलित व्यक्ति को बिठा देंगे.
Yeah.
और यही कारण था कि बाबू जगजीवन राम ने कांग्रेस छोड़ा. One of the tallest leaders of the Dalit community, he left Congress and formed his own political party with the name of CFD, Congress for Democracy. तो ये
Yeah.
जो कांग्रेस और लेफ्ट की सामूहिक हिपोक्रेसी है, वो
Uh,
चरणजीत सिंह चन्नी को बना देंगे और दलित का वोट ले लेंगे. तो ये जो आपका एरोगेंस है, जो आपका फ्यूडल माइंडसेट है कि आज भाई लोग पढ़े लिखे हैं, सिर्फ आपके सरनेम के आधार पे आपको कोई वोट नहीं देगा. आज
hmm,
राहुल गांधी जैसे व्यक्ति को भी परिश्रम करना पड़ रहा है, तो उसको इस बात का एहसास हुआ है कि कहीं ना
hmm.
कहीं मेरा एक डिस्कनेक्ट हो गया था. तो डेफिनेटली एक तो स्ट्रक्चरल इशू को आइडेंटिफाई करना, स्ट्रक्चरल प्रॉब्लम को एक्नॉलेज करना और तब उसके प्रति काम करना. विद इन द डायस्पोरा भी ये प्रॉब्लम है. अब इससे कैसे निपटना है, ये हम लोगों को साथ आके तय करने की आवश्यकता है.
Absolutely. And on a lighter note, because you mentioned Mr. Channi, he gave a statement saying he's in Canada, available 24/7 on his cell phone, getting treatment for his eyes, and he'll be back soon. And he's also apparently pursuing his PhD thesis and will be back soon to submit the same. ये मैं नहीं, Tribune India का report बोल रहा है. Please Google करके पढ़ ले. So I don't know what Mr. Channi is doing.
This is
This is
very
this
yes.
is representation for this say. Okay, if the Congress party is serious about representation, are they giving their leaders the
Correct.
freedom to choose the candidates, to choose their view? Because election jitna harna to is a part of it, right? If Mayavati loses an election, she doesn't go to America or Russia or somewhere, opposition may bet, right, talk about it, right? So it's similarly when it comes to Dalit leaders in BJP, or the late Mr. Ramvilas Paswan, because he's had his own share of political ups and downs, and he's had a very interesting journey. But what I want to leave are, so we always typically recommend a non-political, non-show book and stuff. And one of my first recommendations is the book, because what I love about the book is only it's 30% or 40% of it is political. 60% of it is you're talking, approaching, and होनी भी चाहिए उतनी तो political, because you cannot talk about the movement in India without talking about the political gains. But you also talk about Udham Singh, and so forth. But there is also the cultural aspect of it, and as you beautifully said, a regional aspect of it. India is a union of 30 states, but so many cultural components within those states, and I think you address them very well. So please do read it. But if there's any, and then I think he mentioned the book written by Deep Haldar as well. Please do read it as well. But any closing comments, any final words you wanted to say on this before we wrap up the podcast?
No, certainly. Like I said, that Dalit issues, Dalit history, the future of Dalit discourse in country, that's very important. That we must study. We must have an objective and a dispassionate worldview, a dispassionate perspective on this, and not just base our opinion on the basis of what is being written in the Western newspaper or the Western academic establishment or the Western think tanks, because obviously they also sort of tend to extrapolate things on the basis of their own prejudices. बट वास्तव में यदि आपको समझना है तो ये देखने की आवश्यकता है कि आज जब डाइवर्सिटी इक्विटी इंक्लूजन की बात वेस्ट में होती है, टुडे लाइक आई मेंशन अबाउट द स्टोरी ऑफ द्रौपदी मुर्मू, the highest representation of Dalits in the Council of Ministry for the first time. Today, you have highest representation of Dalits within the organizational hierarchy of the BJP. It was the BJP who first made a Dalit a national president of a national political party in the form of Swargya Bangaru Lakshmanji. It was the BJP who first made GMC Balyogi the first Dalit person as a speaker of the Lok Sabha. It was the BJP that in the entire history of our country, in the presidential nominations to Rajya Sabha since 1952, Adit, since 1952, in the presidential nomination to Rajya Sabha, in the art, culture, and literature category, for the first time, someone from Tamil Nadu, Ilayya Raja, who is a Dalit, has been sent to Rajya Sabha. पहली बार ऐसा एलिट स्पेस बना के रखा था इन्होंने प्रेसिडेंशियल नॉमिनेशन को, ऐसा एलिट स्पेस इन्होंने बना के रखा था पद्मश्री पद्म भूषण को। आज उड़ीसा के किसी शेड्यूल ट्राइब के व्यक्ति हलदार नाग को मिलता है तो हम सब के लिए सम्मान का विषय है। तमिलनाडु से, कर्नाटक से, यू हैव वुमेन who are actually working for the marginalized, who are coming from the marginalized lived experience, उनको जब पद्मश्री मिलता है, पद्मा अवार्ड्स मिलते हैं, जब उनको प्रेसिडेंशियल नॉमिनेशन से राज्यसभा में जाने का अवसर मिलता है, तो इसका हम सबको स्वागत करना चाहिए। ऐसा नहीं कि कोई हजारों मील दूर बैठ करके ये तय करता है कि भारत में रिप्रेजेंटेशन नहीं है, भारत में एक्सप्लॉइटेशन है, भारत में दलितों के साथ अन्याय अत्याचार हो रहा है। लेकिन इसके साथ साथ इस कहानी को भी बताने की आवश्यकता है, इन तथ्यों को भी सामने रखने की आवश्यकता है।
एब्सोल्युटली। एंड और उनका बेसिस क्या होता है, बिकॉज मेरे 5 अगर अलग मित्र ने आईवी लीग की यूनिवर्सिटी से पेपर निकाले हैं, सो लेट मी कोट दोस पेपर, मेक अ भेलपुरी आर्टिकल ऑफ इट एंड डील विथ इट। सो आई मीन you nailed it, you called, you put it beautifully कि and Nalin Mehta, our good friend at Mind Podcast, just he's written a fabulous book on BJP. The reason I mention it is because he talks about this representation. The representation is not at ministerial level, it's at Pantha Pramukh levels, it's at electro. So see, when do you feel empowered? And I'm not just talking about here, Dalit politics, and any community, when they feel empowered is because within 100 people you are celebrating Diwali and Holi together, one of them is the Panna Pramukh, one of them is a representation or an MLA aspirant or something. And Nalin weaves into this when the discussion, and none of it is viewed with the prism of caste or community or something, it is viewed as representation across to a government post, to that post. So when that happens, that is when the discussion is shifted, and that's what you put forth very wonderfully. But thank
if I add
yes, please.
one small thing, तो अभी दुर्गा पूजा चल रहा है,
हाँ,
और दुर्गा पूजा में हमारे यहाँ पूर्वी भारत में पंडाल का एक कल्चर रहा है कि पंडाल लगता है। आपके वेस्टर्न ऑडियंस को मैं बताना चाहता हूँ, टू योर वेस्टर्न ऑडियंस आई वांट टू just put this on record. In Patna, for the last 40 years, the biggest pandal, पटना का सबसे भव्य, सबसे विशाल पंडाल जो लगता है, वो एक दलित समाज का व्यक्ति लगाता है। ये हमारी संवेदनशीलता है, और आप वहां बैठ करके तय करते हैं कि दलितों का और हिंदुत्व का कनेक्शन नहीं है, हिंदुत्व बहुत ही एक्सप्लॉइटेटिव है, स्ट्रक्चरल है, डिस्क्रिमिनेटरी है। तो मैं ये आपको बताना चाहता हूं कि दुर्गा पूजा हो, सरस्वती पूजा हो, छठ पूजा हो, कांवड़ यात्रा हो, कभी हिम्मत है तो आकर के देखिएगा, और यहाँ सोशल प्रोफाइलिंग करके पता चल जाएगा आपको कि कितना है। जैसा मैं अक्सर कहता हूँ कि दलित्स हैव बीन at the forefront of our culture and civilization, not from today but from since times immemorial.
Yeah, no, and I want to add the same thing about my state of Gujarat and Navratri. There is, when it comes to Ma ka Garba, everyone is just, you need, all people need is bhakti in their heart and the dhol beating at full rhythm, or ho jata hai. So, but on that beautiful note, for wishes to everyone for Pujo and Navratri and the Dashera, which is coming up in 3 days. You've been very generous with your time. thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
I think
Thanks a
it was
lot.
a phenomenal discussion. But all our viewers to know this, once you've come on Mind Podcast once, hum jaane nahi dete, so we'll do a sequel to this very soon,
Certainly.
and
Certainly.
we'll approach it from all the angles that we didn't have the time to cover in
And
this
let
discussion.
me thank on record Sunanda ji and Aftans Bhaiya for this. That obviously, but for them we met and then this could happen. ये
Yeah.
अच्छा है कि उनकी भूमिका है इसमें.
Absolutely, absolutely. I appreciate I appreciate you making the time, and thank you guys. Please like, share, subscribe. Please follow him on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and write to us. Comments में लिखिए, Twitter पे लिखिए. Any questions you have, we'd be love to answer them, and we'd love to take them. Till then, it's goodbye, good night, good morning, wherever you are. We'll be back next week with more. Thank you.